Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing a case that is semi-local to me, and that is the case of Brooke Farthing. It is an unsolved case, so let's get started. I did want to say the sole purpose of me sharing this case with you today is for informational purposes only. I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that is discussed here today. I have gathered the information from a list of resources I have found on the internet. If you're interested in those, I will be listing those down in the description below. As always, please be respectful of any comments that you may be leaving, as those close to the case may say them.
Brookelyn Farthing was 18 when she was last seen at a home in Berea. It is the question no one has been able to answer. What happened to Brookelyn Farthing?
Marks another year without knowing how their loved one disappeared. Brookelyn Farthing, who hasn't been seen since 2013.
Saturday will mark the 6-year anniversary since Brookelyn Farthing went missing here in Madison County. And a half dozen years later, her mother is still holding out hope for the best case scenario.
It has been 5 years since Brookelyn Farthing disappeared, and her family is still hoping and praying that they can find her. Brookelyn disappeared when she went to a friend's house back in 2013. She's believed to have been at a home on Dillon Court in Berea. Back then, the homeowner told police he left Farthing at the home for a short while that morning, and when he came back, she was gone and his house was on fire. Police said then there was no evidence Brookelyn was hurt in the fire and no evidence of foul play. But clearly her family wants answers. They know she didn't just walk off and start a new life somewhere. Police have searched all over Madison County and beyond looking for any sign of her. So understandably, it's been a tough 5 years for Brookelyn's family.
Brooke Farthing, or Brooke as she was known to her family and friends, was an 18-year-old from Berea, Kentucky. Berea is located in central Kentucky. It's a pretty small town with a population of only about 15,000. The feel there is very close-knit, where it feels like everyone knows everyone and the community really looks out for each other. Brookelyn was born August 26, 1994. She lived with her mom, Shelby, her stepfather, Randy, and her two sisters, Paige and Tasha. Brooke was a petite girl at about 5'1", only weighed a little over 100 pounds. She had blonde hair and brown eyes and was super pretty. Brooke was a recent graduate from Madison Southern High School, where she was known to be very social. She had a lot of friends and was really known around her community. She was described as being sweet and caring, but also witty and had a tomboy side. She enjoyed spending time being outdoors, fishing, and riding four-wheelers, hanging with the guys. On the flip side of that, she was also a girly girl. She really enjoyed things like doing her hair and her makeup. And after she graduated, she was considering going to cosmetology school. She wasn't sure if she really wanted to go to cosmetology school or just start immediately working, so she took the summer off to spend time with her family and her friends to make up her mind of what she wanted to do. The case starts on Friday, June 21st, 2013. Brooke and her family had a pretty busy day planned ahead, and that morning, Brooke and her sister Paige went to the DMV to try and get their driver's license. They were both taking the test and were pretty excited about it. Paige went first and she failed the test, unfortunately. Brooke followed up and she passed. She was really excited about this, especially considering it was the start of summer, and she was hoping that her dad was going to let her use his truck over the summer and have a little bit of extra freedom. It kind of became a running joke in the family that Brooke passed and Paige didn't pass the exam, but nonetheless, all of the girls were still very excited that at least somebody had passed. Later on in the day, the family had plans to attend their Papa Kenny's 70th birthday party. It was a pretty big deal because his health was declining and they weren't sure if he was even going to make it over the weekend. So it was a big milestone for the family, and they wanted to make sure that the entire family came out to celebrate. At the end of the party, when Brooke and her sister were leaving, she was described as being very typical. She was giving out hugs and very smiley. Everything seemed pretty normal. After the birthday party, Brooke, Paige, and their cousin Heather left the party to go over to Heather's house. They went over to Heather's to get ready for a party that the three were going to attend later in the evening. The party that they were going to was what's called a field party. If you're not familiar with what a field party is, they're pretty common in the Midwest and South, And it's basically where a bunch of high school or college age kids get together in the middle of nowhere or a field, and there's usually a bonfire and music, not very much supervision, and they all hang out where the chances of the party getting busted are pretty low considering they are in the middle of nowhere. I'm from Southern Indiana, and I know back in my day I went to more than a few field parties, and they were always something that I looked forward to, and I'm sure the girls were really excited to go. The field party that they were going to was located on Red Lick Road in Berea. The three girls arrived at the party together, but Brooke actually brought an overnight bag with her because she had plans to meet another one of her girlfriends at this party and go home with her. After they had been at the party for a while, Paige and Heather ended up leaving without Brooke since she had the plans to stay with the other friend. As the night wore on, the friend that Brooke was going to leave with decided that she was actually going to leave the party with a guy. Brooke and her kind of got in a little argument about this because that was not the original plan and kind of altered what Brooke was going to do the rest of the night. Despite this, Brooke was still determined that she was going to have a good rest of her evening. After this, she was seen drinking and dancing, socializing, still very much enjoying herself and having a good time. Later in the night, Brooke ran into an old friend of hers that she had known from high school, and it was pretty clear to her that he was in no position to drive because he had been drinking a lot. He was ready to go, and since it was so late, she was ready to go as well. She told him that she was going to try and find a ride for the both of them so that they weren't going to be putting themselves in any risk or danger. She started asking around, seeing if anyone was there that could safely give them a ride home when she ran into a familiar face. His name was 24-year-old Joshua Hensley. She knew Josh through an ex-boyfriend of hers, Jared, and Josh and Jared were friends, so she felt pretty comfortable when she asked if Josh could give them a ride home, and he agreed. The three of them were seen leaving the party together, all getting in Josh's car at around 3 o'clock in the morning. First, they dropped Brooke's male friend off at his house, and they were supposed to then go and drop Brooke off at her house. And this is where the details of the case get a little interesting because we're taking into consideration this is part of the story that is coming from Josh. It's not known why Josh didn't just take Brooke back to her house like they had planned, but ultimately they ended up going back to Josh's house instead. His house was located on the outskirts of Berea, where it was still described to be a pretty nice area of town. It was definitely more rural, and the road that he lived on only had about 8 or 9 houses, so not a lot of people around, but still a fairly nice area. Nothing that would indicate that she would be in danger or throw up any kind of alarming red flags. When they got there, she actually realized that the house directly across the street from Josh's house was her Sunday school teacher, so she was pretty familiar with the area even though it was still on the outskirts of town. As I mentioned, this area was more rural, so his house actually backed up to a pretty steep incline of mountains, and it was very wooded with a large lake located very close. They pull up to Josh's house, they both go inside, and this is when Brooke realizes that something's kind of sketchy. He tells Brooke that he's in the middle of a divorce and his house is actually being foreclosed on. So things were pretty rocky in his world, and that meant that there was no electricity to the house and there was also no running water. The house was in pretty rough shape and it started making Brooke feel pretty uncomfortable, which I don't blame her. I know that if it were me and I had been drinking, left a party with basically a stranger, and he brings me to his house that is in complete disarray at 3 in the morning or after 3 in the morning, and there was no electricity and no water, I would start feeling pretty uncomfortable pretty quickly. Although Brooke had been drinking earlier in the evening, at this point she had sobered up enough to know that she wanted to leave and did not want to stay at this guy's house. She started texting around seeing if anyone was able to give her a ride home. She called Paige and asked if Heather was able to come pick her up, but unfortunately Heather had also been drinking and could not leave and get her. As we know, Paige didn't have her license, so she wasn't able to come get her, but Brooke reassured Paige that she was going to call her ex Jared and see if he was able to come pick her up. Brooke ended up texting her ex Jared to see if he would be able to give her a ride home. Now, it might seem kind of weird that she would text her ex to do this, but They had just recently broken up and decided to stay on pretty good terms with each other, stay friends, and they still were talking pretty often. They dated for about 3 years before this and actually lived together the previous year and a half. At the time of the text, Jared was actually at work at a local factory where he worked third shift, and he told her, yes, I'll be able to come pick you up, but unfortunately I'm stuck at work right now, so it's not going to be until around 6 or 6:30 whenever I get off. He asked if that was okay, and Brooke said that it was fine because she was there, but Josh was asleep in the other bedroom, and she was just going to hang out on the couch, smoking a cigarette and waiting for him to get there. And that was the plan. Jared was going to get off work and text Brooke to let her know when he was on his way. So he wasn't expecting to hear from Brooke again until he texted her to let her know he was coming to get her. So he put his phone up and continued working. Unbeknownst to him, Brooke started texting him. At this point, it's probably around 4:30 in the morning, and sent a series of really strange texts. The first one said, "Is there any way you can come pick me up sooner?" And then that one followed up with, "Please hurry." And then that one followed up with, "I'm scared." Brooke didn't say exactly what she was scared of, and since Jared's phone was put away while he was working, he didn't immediately respond to her. Once he saw her texts, he ended up asking her what she was scared of, but didn't end up getting a response. At about 5:30, he gets another text that says, "Never mind, I'm okay. I'm actually going to go to a party that's located in Rockcastle County." Since this was after 5:30 in the morning and Brooke's tone changed so quickly, it was kind of confusing for Jared, and he said, "Whose party?" But he never got a response back. He figured everything was fine, and he ended up going back home and not going over to Josh's house. And that was the last time that any of Brooke's family or friends would be hearing from Brooke. Later on that day, on Saturday, June 22nd, Brooke had plans to meet another one of her friends, Matt, at a car show. She was supposed to meet him around 9 that morning, but she never ended up showing up. Matt tried calling her and texting her and got no response. It was pretty unlike Brooke to just not show up and also not tell him that she wasn't going to be there, so he started reaching out to her sister to see if she knew where Brooke was. Paige, Tasha, and Heather all start trying to get in contact with Brooke. They try calling her and texting her, but they also can't reach her. They also said it was pretty unlike Brooke to just not respond, but their first thought wasn't to panic. They were thinking that maybe Brooke had just gotten drunk and she was sleeping it off somewhere, her phone had died, and that when she woke up, she'd reach back out to them and it would be a big misunderstanding and see all of these missed texts and phone calls. After several hours of not getting a response from Brooke, her sisters started to really worry. They weren't sure what was going on, but Paige remembered that Brooke mentioned she was going to ask Jared to pick her up from Josh's house. They got in contact with Jared and asked if he actually did end up picking Brooke up from Josh's house. That's when he told her about the conversation they had had early that morning and that she said she was going to go to a party in Rockcastle County. When they found out about this supposed party that was in Rockcastle County, her sisters started digging around to see where this party was, who she even would have gone there with since she didn't have a ride anywhere, and how she would have found out about it. They came up with nothing. They could not figure out whose party this was, if there even was a party, and that's when they started getting scared. Tasha calls Jared again and asks if she could have Josh's phone number. She wanted to get in touch with Josh to see if he knew maybe whose party it was or who she had left his house with. She gets on the phone with Josh and he says that yes, Brooke was at his house that night, but he didn't know where she had gone or who she had left with. He said he didn't know because he actually left the house before Brooke left because he knew that Jared was on his way to come pick her up and felt uncomfortable with the idea of Jared knowing he was alone in a house in the middle of the night with his buddy's ex-girlfriend. He didn't want things to come across to Jared as anything going on that would maybe be inappropriate, so he told her he left her there and went out to go put his horses away overnight. Tasha and Josh hang up the phone and there's still not any answers of where Brooke is at. About 10 or 15 minutes later, Tasha gets a phone call from Josh. She picks up the phone and Josh sounds really freaked out. He says, "Ma'am, I'm freaking out and I'm panicking." Tasha says, "Panicking? What's going on? Why are you panicking?" At this point, he says, "Well, I'm not sure if Brooke did it or not, but when I got back home from putting horses away, my house was on fire." She says, "On fire? What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I called in a fire around 7 this morning because I walked in and my couch was on fire. Brooke wasn't there, but my couch was on fire." At around 7 o'clock that morning, Josh had actually made a call to 911 to report that his house was on fire. Firefighters arrive on scene and they walk in to see the only thing burning in the house is a couch in his living room. The fire was starting to spread enough to where it burned a hole in the floor of the living room, but they were able to extinguish the fire quickly enough that nothing else was damaged. They ultimately determined that the fire was suspicious because the only thing on fire was this couch and there was not any electricity. But at this point, there was not any correlation between the fire and Brooke because they didn't know that Brooke was even at the house that day or could have potentially been in the house when the fire started. When Brooke's family finds out about this house fire, that's when alarm bells really start going off and they start panicking. Why would Josh not have mentioned that to Tasha the first time they had a conversation? Why would he call her back and then all of a sudden share it like it was no big deal, but also saying that he's freaking out and he's panicking over this? After the second phone call, Brooke's family immediately goes over to Josh's house. When they get there, police are on scene and everything is roped off and taped off because they're treating the fire as a crime scene. When they walk up to the house, they quickly realize that all of Brooke's belongings are sitting in her overnight bag on Josh's porch. Not only is her overnight bag there with her change of clothes and her makeup, but also her shoes. The only pair of shoes that she had brought with her and that she was wearing when she went to the party and left with Josh. They realized that the only thing missing at this point was Brooke herself and her cell phone. When the family arrived at Josh's house and saw the police were there and saw that Brooke's things were also there, they told police what was going on. They told police that they had not been able to get in contact with Brooke. As far as they knew, the last place Brooke was seen and the last person Brooke was seen with was Josh and at Josh's house. And they were really concerned. It wasn't like Brooke to not respond. It wasn't like Brooke to just vanish and disappear and not tell anybody where she was or check in with them. Police then questioned Josh and asked, "Was this girl at your house? Do you know where she is?" And he basically tells police the same thing that he had told Tasha earlier, and that was he felt uncomfortable knowing Jared was on his way to pick Brooke up, so he left the house to go tend to his horses. The last time that he saw Brooke, she was sitting on his couch in the living room and she was smoking a cigarette, but she was also talking to somebody on the phone, and he overheard her talking about going to a party that was in Rockcastle County. They asked if he knew who she was talking to or who she would be going to this party with, and he said he didn't know. He didn't ask, and he left to go take care of the horses. When he got back, that's when he realized Brooke wasn't there, but the house was on fire, and he called 911. Since the fire was deemed suspicious and police now have this new bit of information that there is a missing girl and they're both connected to the same person, they quickly started taking action. Police and about 200 volunteers started immediately searching the direct area around Josh's house looking for any trace of Brooke. As I mentioned, the area around Josh's house was very rural. Not only was it rural, but it was rocky and it was very hilly. There were sinkholes and there were cliffs, there was a lot of poisonous snakes, and it was just very hard to search for anything in that area. The trained volunteers were looking on foot, they were looking on horseback, they had cadaver dogs, and they also had divers to search in the ponds and lakes nearby Josh's house. After searching about 16,000 acres, they just turned up nothing. Because of this terrain, it is very easy for even trained volunteers and police to get injured or go missing. While the searches were going on, police tried pinging Brooke's cell phone to try and narrow down where to look. or maybe give them an idea of where Brooke was and try and rescue her. They weren't able to find anything, and they determined that Brooke's cell phone was off, and that's why they couldn't find a ping for her phone. They continued searching, but ultimately in July of 2013, they had to call off all searches for Brooke because it was just such a safety risk. Police also pulled Brooke's cell phone records and determined that the last outgoing text message or phone call was to Jared, and that was at around 5:30 on the 22nd. Those were the series of texts where she said that she was okay and she was going to be going to a party in Rockcastle County. They saw hundreds of incoming phone calls and text messages that were never responded to, and those were from all of her family and friends trying to get in touch with her when they realized that she was missing. Police questioned the people that were in contact with Brooke or were seen with Brooke the night that she went missing. They questioned Jared, but he had a rock-solid alibi because he was at work, and they verified this and cleared him. They also questioned all the kids that were at the field party and were told she left the party with the drunk classmate and Josh. They also questioned Josh, but they never named anybody a suspect in Brooke's case. And unfortunately, that's kind of where Brooke's case still stands. There's not really any new information, and police have not disclosed anything that's going on outside of that. When Brooke's family was asked what they think happened to Brooke, understandably, they do not think that Brooke would have just vanished. It was so unlike her, and she had plans the next day. She had plans for the summer, and she was excited. She had just got her license. There was no reason that she would have just vanished. They also are really confused why she would have left the only belongings she had with her in that overnight bag at Josh's house. Not only did she leave her change of clothes and makeup and purse that she always had with her, she left her only pair of shoes. Why would you leave your only pair of shoes to go to another county 30 minutes away at a stranger's house? To them, this just doesn't make sense. It's not adding up. They also do not think that the last text messages that Brooke sent to Jared were actually Brooke at all. They think that Josh sent those text messages to Jared. Shelby, Brooke's mother, says that her number one question that she has for Josh Hensley is, where's Brooke? She thinks that Josh knows exactly what happened to Brooke and that he's just not talking. They think that the 911 call also just doesn't make sense. If you knew that there was somebody inside of your house and you got there and your home was on fire, why would you have not mentioned that during your 911 call? Why would you have not said, my house is on fire and there could be somebody inside? Josh never mentioned anything about Brooke to authorities at any point until Brooke's family arrived at his house after the fire was already extinguished. Not only that, but the last known place that Brooke was known to be was at Josh's house. Josh said when he left, she was sitting on the couch, and Brooke also had told Jared that she was sitting on the couch. Isn't it a little bit of a coincidence that the last physical place Brooke was sitting on that couch was the only thing that managed to catch fire while she was there? Why would that be? Is it because there was evidence on the couch? Was it because he was trying to hide the fact that Brooke was there at all? The pieces just aren't fitting together. It just doesn't make sense. Since Berea is a small town, obviously the rumor mill's running rampant, and everybody basically thinks the same thing. They think that Josh Hensley definitely had something to do with Brooke's disappearance. They think that Josh's alibi and his story just doesn't make sense. It's very contradictory, and basically, he was saying the whole reason he was leaving that house to go put the horses away was to avoid this awkward situation, or potentially awkward situation, between Jared and himself. Well, if he had heard Brooke arranging these plans to go to a party in Rockcastle County, he knew at that moment Jared was not coming to pick her up. Why would he wake up in the middle of the night to avoid a situation that was no longer going to happen and go outside and put horses away? It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. Aside from all of that, let's think about how quickly things catch on fire. If the only thing in Josh's house that was on fire was that couch, that means that if Brooke's cigarette was the reason that couch caught on fire, she had to have been there moments before Josh got back home. That means that this party that she had supposedly wanted to go to or was leaving to go to was still going on at 7 in the morning. Not only was it going on at 7 in the morning, that means that she would have had to have left Josh's house just shortly before 7 to go to a party over 30 minutes away in a neighboring county. If we're going to go off of the basis that she was actually going to this party in the next county, it still doesn't make sense. She wanted to get out of there, and Jared said he would be able to leave to pick her up between 6 and 6:30. If she didn't leave Josh's house until 7 or shortly before 7, that's later than what Jared said he could be there at. That means she would have chosen to stay at Josh's house even later than the already 6 or 6:30 that she was planning on leaving. As if Josh's alibi and his story already didn't make any sense, this just keeps adding to it. Nothing this guy is saying or his story about how the night played out is adding up at all. And in case you forgot, Brooke had plans to go to a car show with her friend Matt at 9. That basically means that she's leaving around 7 to drive 30 minutes away to Rockcastle County to go to a party. What is she gonna do? Stay there for a few minutes and then turn around and leave to go back home, get ready for this car show, and then leave again to go to the car show? That timeline does not make sense. None of this makes any sense of what Josh is saying happened. Brooke's family learns that Josh Hensley worked for the county road department, which basically means he knows the land like the back of his hand. He knows all of the back roads, the side roads, the dumping sites. He knows the drop-offs, and he knows so much more about that area and the land than most people would know unless you were in a position like his. He used these roads and traveled them every single day because it was his job to do so. That means that if he wanted to get rid of something or someone, he potentially knew exactly where to go and how to get there. As it stands today, over 7 years after Brooke's disappearance, her family and friends still have no answers. The community is still so shaken over Brooke's disappearance. Her mom says that she just wants to bring Brooke home. Even if that means Brooke is no longer alive, she deserves the respect of having a final service and a proper resting place. She wants to have a place where she can visit Brooke and lay her to rest. Unrelated to Brooke's disappearance, in August of 2020, Josh Hensley and 2 other men were arrested for charges on child sexual exploitation. The men were discovered promoting the sexual performance of a minor. There is a $14,000 reward for information leading to Brooke or Brooke's whereabouts, or for the capture and conviction of those held responsible for her disappearance. This is still an active investigation, and Kentucky State Police are still searching for answers.
We're still getting information. Some of it may be good and some of it may lead us nowhere, but we're still actively following up on every piece of information.
I personally believe this is a case that will be solved. It's just a matter of when or who is going to come forward. Somebody knows something. Somebody has to know what happened to Brooke, whether that's Josh or somebody else. The answers are out there, and I personally think it's just a matter of time before we all find out what happened to Brooke Farthing. Brookelyn was a beautiful girl. She was a daughter, she was a sister, a friend, and she is so very loved and missed. Brooke's family's not giving up hope. Her mom says that's the only thing that she can do. She has to hold on to that hope that Brooke's case will be solved and they will have justice for Brooke. So what do you guys think? What do you think happened to Brooke? Do you think that there is something else that we don't know? Or do you think that Josh Hensley knows more than what he's leading on? Please share Brooke's story with as many people as you can so that her name is out there, her story is out there, and hopefully one day she will get the justice that she so very deserves. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed today's video. I'm looking forward to see what you believe happened to Brooke in the comments. Until next time, please subscribe, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks.